Cincinnati Bengals starters on the defensive side of the ball are going to see some changes in 2023. Are they better? Are they worse? Let's break down the defensive changes this year.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and you can subscribe to this podcast on YouTube or anywhere you listen to your podcast. And become an everydayer. You would know if you were an everydayer, for example, that yesterday we talked about how the offense is better in 2023, as today we dive into the defense, and you can make us your first listen with the many other Bengals fans that do the same. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. James, we spent a lot of time yesterday going through the roster changes on the offensive side of the ball. Today, we take a look at the defense. Like the offense, mostly stable at most spots. But let's start again with the position that is going to see the most change, and that's going to be the safety position, where there will be two new starters in 2023. And I think three safeties that see regular playing time this year.
Yeah, I think that part is going to be interesting, is how Lou uses these guys, because you mentioned at the top, better or worse. Well, the Bengals on paper are worse at safety, and they're probably going to be worse at safety this season. But the way, or one way at least, to mitigate some of that, change things up a bit. And Lou Anarumo from week to week is able to change things up a bit. So I'm curious to see how he uses Dax Hill, who is as good of an athlete as he's had at safety since coaching the Bengals, since joining the Bengals as the defensive coordinator in 2019. So you have Dax Hill, a guy who's really versatile, that you can move around, that I think is much more comfortable now that he knows what his role is going to be. I think last year, think about it from his perspective. You have these two guys that are pending free agents, and Jessie Bates and Vonn Bell. Bates misses most of the offseason program. Dax looked good in the preseason, playing that safety spot. And then after that, he was kind of backup everything, backup safety, backup nickel, backup outside corner. And it was just, you toss them all over. So one, I think you're going to see a Dax Hill that you didn't get to see as a rookie. But the thing that from a talent standpoint, experience standpoint, all of those things that I think Lou can do is put these guys in their best spot to have success. And that's where the three safety look does come into play. Because last year we talked about it, maybe Dax Hill being that third safety. But you have Mike Hilton. You have these two safeties that you trust. I just think Lou was like, no, let's go with what we know. This is where we're at our best. This year, I think you could make the argument that having three safeties, having Jordan Battle in the mix as that in-the-box type safety, alongside Nick Scott, who we've talked about, can play that deep Jessie Bates type role, and Dax Hill can do a little bit of everything. I think that's in an ideal world how it would play out. I don't know how much that'll take place, the three safety look, but I certainly think it's in the cards where they could go with those three young guys. And then you have obviously Tyson Anderson behind them, and he's obviously a great athlete as well.
I think that the third down thing is where you see the three safety thing, to just use the word thing unceremoniously a couple times there in a row. Third down passing situations. You heard Lou Anarumo talk about this after the selection of Jordan Battle and how highly this coaching staff thinks of Jordan Battle. Seems like they're going to leverage that with Dax Hill's flexibility. And we saw this a little bit in the playoffs last year, even where Dax Hill was covering Dawson Knox in the end zone in a three safety look is part of why that pass goes incomplete. And we've seen Dax Hill throughout his career already, and going back to Michigan, have the ability to play really sticky man coverage. And against tight ends, his athleticism plays up. Like, he's going to be on the hip pocket of pretty much any tight end in the league in man coverage. with his athletic ability, with his cover ability. And you got a couple guys in Nick Scott who can play, as you said, who can play deep safety. I think that's his primary role for this team this year. In Jordan Battle, who's just that savvy, instinctual player. If that translates to the NFL immediately, having Battle and Nick Scott in those traditional safety roles in some of those clear passing situations, and Dax Hill deployed on whatever dynamic tight end the Bengals happen to be seeing that week, because you got Mark Andrews twice and likely in Baltimore. You got George Kittle on the schedule this year. You got Travis Kelce on the schedule this year. You got Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox on the schedule this year.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like another one of those years where the Bengals have to go through this gauntlet of tight ends. I think that's a place where the Bengals can get those three safeties on the field and it be something that works in their favor. Now, of course, that means you're taking off probably a linebacker in that situation. But with Trey Flowers departed, officially signed elsewhere down in Atlanta, that makes sense in terms of a role that needs to be filled that Dax Hill kind of lines up with. And when you have a guy like Jordan Battle now, who they've adding talent and depth to the safety room that they feel really good about, makes a lot of sense to see those three guys on the field together, to me, in some situations.
Sure. I certainly think we could see it. And it's the key to it, because I don't really worry about Dax. Year 2 in the system, I know some are. I don't, if people can tell. Nick Scott, I know he's only has 1 year starting experience, but played in the playoffs, was starting in the playoffs for the Rams. I think he's going to be fine as well. Jordan Battle tested at Alabama, certainly, right? No pun intended, but yes, pun intended. Will he be able to pick it up right away, that quick, and be that good? Because Lou doesn't just trust defensive backs from the jump. I think that's something that we could certainly see last year with Cam Taylor-Britt, Eli Apple. Obviously, Eli had his trust because he's the veteran. And a guy like Cam Taylor-Britt had to earn it a little bit. And even with a guy like Dax, they weren't going to force Dax on the field when he has guys that he trusted. So that dynamic is interesting, but I like the safety room. And considering people were panicking a bit, I think, once Vonn Bell signed elsewhere and everyone knew Jessie Bates was going elsewhere, when they both departed to the NFC South, I think there was some panic. Nick Scott helped some. And now you get a guy like Battle. I feel pretty good about the Bengals safety room. It might not be a strength, like the strength that it was for the past couple of years with Vonn Bell and Jessie Bates, but I don't think it's a glaring hole or weakness or issue that's going to cause the Bengals to lose games.
And you have a long-term setup here. You've got guys under contract for years at this position. It's cost controlled. They, instead of spending a combined $23 million to bring back their two safeties per year, which they were never going to do, $23.5 million, whatever it works out to, which they were never going to do. They're much cheaper at the position with 2 rookie contracts and a really relatively modest contract for Nick Scott for a starting safety. What is it, about $4 million a year?
Yeah,
for Nick
3
Scott?
years, $4 million per. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you're pretty affordable at that position when you've seen your 2 starting safeties from last year go sign the 2 biggest free agent deals on the market in Jessie Bates and Vonn Bell. Some cost savings there where that's something that's important to them. We talked about Juan Thornhill here and Julian Love and some other veteran safeties. The Bengals go the Nick Scott route. And you can see the fit. You can see the vision with these guys. And the biggest thing is going to be how do they pick up the communication? And you mentioned, how quickly does Jordan Battle get in there and earn Lou Anarumo's trust, earn Nick Saban's trust as a freshman? So
yeah,
he's got that chip.
That's a good point.
That little piece of history to him. And everything you hear about Jordan Battle is that the football IQ is off the charts. And that's just another reason I think it's going to be hard to keep him off the field because, you hear the way the Bengals talk about his film breakdowns in their meetings with him. They're like, you know what? You're good. We got everything we need from like 2 plays, was it, or 3 plays or something like that? It was quick. They had to cut him off. So excited to see how these guys play together. You're right. It may not be a strength anymore, but they do have a long-term cost-controlled core. And you can see these guys grow together. And maybe it takes a little bit of time this year, but you're right. I don't think it's a big weakness. And when you look at this defense, James, I have a hard time really identifying a glaring weakness. So let's keep talking about that and some of the other ways they could have gotten better and did get better coming up next.
Today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you and never take a moment to think about what you need from yourself, to look internally and think, what do I need? But when we spend all of our time giving, it can leave us feeling stretched thin, burned out, and therapy can give you the tools to find more balance in your life so you can keep supporting others without having to leave yourself behind. BetterHelp is completely online, and if you're thinking of using therapy or going to therapy, you need to give BetterHelp a try because, well, it's as convenient as therapy has ever been. It's entirely online, flexible, it's suited to your schedule, and you fill out a questionnaire and you'll get matched up with a therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time, no cost at all. So all it is questionnaire, and you get a licensed therapist, and you can find the right match for you. And all you have to do is go to BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
A lot of ways we could go with talking about some of the other changes on this defense, James. Let's quickly knock out one unit and do the opposite of our first discussion that hasn't changed really at all. And that's the linebackers. Jermaine Pratt is back. Logan Wilson, obviously still under contract. Akeem Davis-Gaither still under contract. Marcus Bailey, Joe Bacci, rounding out the room. Seems pretty clear cut to me. Do they carry 6 linebackers again? Maybe there's a conversation there for linebacker 6. But outside of that, the return of Jermaine Pratt was a little bit unexpected going into the offseason. But now that he's back, you have stability really in your front 7. Front 6, whatever you want to call it, all together with minor changes. And we'll see if there's an expanded role for ADG or if they just run it back. Kind of seems like mostly you just run it back here with potentially the question of, does Jermaine Pratt see more third downs? Given what we know his complaints were or his desires were as the season went on last year, and he lands back in Cincinnati, of course, but he wanted to play third down. So that's really the only question at the linebacker position to me right now.
I think it's going to be business as usual. I think they'll use him the way they used him last year. And if they feel that the need to put him on field for more third downs in certain matchups or certain situations, I think that could happen. So week to week that could change. But overall, I don't think much changes here. And man, if I would have told you going into free agency, Vonn Bell would get more on an annual basis than Jermaine Pratt, I don't think you would have believed me. I certainly wouldn't have believed myself. But the way the linebacker market played out and the way the 2 top safeties, Jessie Bates and Vonn Bell, the way they got paid. I mean, that's the thing. If Vonn Bell didn't get that deal with Carolina, he might not have signed for much more than what Nick Scott got. He might have had to take whatever the Bengals offered him, which rumor had it was a 2-year deal, not a 3-year deal. But Jermaine Pratt is he brings stability there. And I think for all of the shuffling around at safety, the fact that your front 7 is pretty much intact, and obviously we're focused on the linebackers at this very second, but you feel really good about that. And I think it'll be those 2 guys, Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, and then Akeem Davis-Gaither will be that 3rd guy. But you feel really good about a lot of them. I mean, Joe Bacci, I know they trust him. Marcus Bailey, I know they trust him. So you feel really good about the linebackers in this room. And you're right. Maybe they keep 6 and there's a battle there. But the first 5 guys, I think they're really confident in and believe any of those guys can play a linebacker for them if one of the top guys gets hurt.
And they have had to press some of those guys into action in the past, and they've generally acquitted themselves pretty well. Akeem Davis-Gaither had one of the best games of his career when he had to play last year, stepping up in injury replacement duty. And so you like the depth there. Not a whole lot has changed. Is it a better or worse position? Pretty tough to say either way, right? You got the same guys doing probably the same things. Hard to say that they're going to be worse. And they could get better if they take a step. They could regress. Who knows? But right now, on paper, it's the same guys. Should be a very similar unit.
The same or better is what I would say. Because maybe you're right. Maybe Logan's a little bit better, or Akeem Davis-Gaither's a little bit better to give you the edge. But I don't really see it declining much. Who knows? Maybe Jermaine Pratt just stops working out now that he got paid. Kidding, Jermaine. I'm just kidding. Don't get mad at me. I was just joking.
Let's talk defensive front. Another mostly stable position on this roster, but the big, shiny first-round injection of athleticism and talent in Myles Murphy shakes things up a little bit. Now, going into this offseason, we were talking about, can they add a piece to add some pass rush? You and I think, we're mostly looking at the interior defensive line, although we thought maybe an edge addition was possible, and they did. Terrell Basham, also a free agent addition this offseason. And now they go at least 6 deep with guys that you think for sure are making this roster, have played in the NFL, and then maybe even 7 deep at edge with Jeff Gunter, a guy we know they liked last year, 7th-round pick, got hurt, couldn't play. Going to be very interesting competition on the edges. And then on the interior, it's the same guys. And you need somebody to step up there. Can Zach Carter continue his late season ascension from last year? Can Jay Tufele rein in some of those flashes we saw from him and be a more consistent player? This is a spot where I think you and I both looked and thought, maybe they could add a guy there. And the one guy still out there that we've talked about recently, Matt Ioannidis, is like kind of the biggest name that would make sense to me, but it's one of the shallower spots on the roster, which is why I still look externally, James. And I like the players they have, but they don't have that dynamic pass rusher, which is why, again, we spent a lot of time talking about Kalijah Kancey heading into the draft as well as a guy that could add some juice. Let's just keep using that word to the interior rotation.
Yeah, I think it was tough because there weren't many in this class. Yeah. There weren't. And that's part of why, despite the size concerns, Kancey goes 19th to the Bucks and still gets taken early. Adebawore is he wasn't viewed as highly by the NFL as he was by the media. And that's why he fell. And I think that's why the Bengals weren't in on him. I know there was multiple times where it was like, oh, well, you could take him here at 92 or 95. And it was like, he wasn't really even in consideration at that pick. So, yeah, I think that's something they would want to do. Now, do they go external? Ioannidis could certainly make sense. There's another name that you mentioned, and I want you to drop it so I can react to it. Another guy that kind of falls in line with names you've been mentioning in recent days.
Yeah, I mean, Mercedes Lewis, the 38, 39-year-old tight end. Mark Ingram, 34-year-old running back. How about another guy getting toward 40, a little bit older than me, Ndamukong Suh? I mean, yeah, in a similar role to what he did with the Eagles. I don't know if that really makes a whole lot of sense. Linval Joseph, another former Eagle, could be another name, 35 in the same bucket. I would doubt either of those would be very interesting to the Bengals, but you're talking about guys maybe looking for one more year, looking for that Super Bowl run. You can see that being a rotational piece, given the options there and the lack of depth there on the interior defensive line.
Well, you mentioned it pre-show, the Suh comment. The Bengals know him, and not because the front office or anything like that, but while multiple Bengals coaches were in Miami, so was Suh. I just did some research. I was thinking about it. I was like, oh, Lou Anarumo crossed paths with him. He's the defensive coordinator, the interim, with Suh in town in Miami, and was the defensive backs coach there. Zach Taylor was there. So there is a connection there. They didn't use it last year. I don't know how pleasant it was to coach Suh in Miami. I think that he's kind of toned down, settled down a bit. So I think it would be interesting. But yeah, I would be open to it from a player standpoint, because can he, in the right role, still give you something? Sure. I'm watching LeBron James do crazy things at 38. I think Ndamukong Suh is still able to give you a little juice when you need it at 36 years old as a situational guy on the inside. But they may just stick with what they have right now. And I think that's more likely than not. But never say never, because I do think that they're on the hunt. And maybe we talked about trade tight end wise. Maybe this is you find the next BJ Hill this way, and you can find a trade, because there's some defensive lines that have just so much depth. I think the Bengals have a good amount of depth.
Oh, yeah.
But some of these lines that have been put together are crazy deep. And so there's going to be some good players that could be on the chopping block, and maybe the Bengals are able to nab one of them.
I think there's a little bit more to talk about here with the defensive line. We also haven't talked about corner yet. So a little bit more to talk about here on the defensive side of the ball to finish up this show coming up next.
Let's continue the defensive line conversation. And yeah, if I had to guess, like if you had to put odds on it, I would probably say if they add, it would be via trade versus sign a guy. As weird as that sounds, because I could see them moving one of their backup tackles, offensive tackles, late in the game, late in training camp after a few preseason games, something like that, if they needed to get the right guy in here. But I could see that as a path to them adding a guy to that interior pass rush.
I think it could also be a waiver claim. The big change this year that we haven't really talked about or maybe mentioned once in passing is that this year there's only one cut. You go from 90 to 53. There used to be 3 stages of cuts along the way. Then there were 2 stages of cuts. Now 90 players all the way to final cutdown day. You're going to see from most teams 35 or so players become available from each team on one day. We saw the Bengals had 3 players on waivers last year. Could see that again on the defensive line. The other thing that I wanted to mention on the defensive line before we talk about corner is that if they don't add that 3 tech, I think there are going to be times where you see Myles Murphy, Sam Hubbard, Trey Hendrickson, Joseph Ossai in the field together, and that's your 4. And they didn't do this a ton last year. They liked having BJ Hill on the field in those roles. Mm-hmm. But when you add Myles Murphy to the mix, bigger guy, can kick inside, played a lot of 4-eye, meaning he was lined up on the inside shoulder of the tackle. If they're comfortable and Joseph Ossai is comfortable playing on the left side, I think putting Trey Hendrickson outside on the right side in his traditional alignment, Joseph Ossai outside on the left side where he didn't play last year, Myles Murphy playing inside that tackle shoulder on the right side where Joseph Ossai was playing a lot last year, and Sam Hubbard either playing the other 3 tech or playing, the kind of, well, I guess you need a 3 tech in that situation because you're pretty wide with all the other guys. So Sam Hubbard out there in 3 tech, or maybe they just don't like Hubbard inside. Maybe it is still Ossai inside. Maybe it's just BJ Hill there. But they give you you get some flexibility there with that package, the quote unquote NASCAR package. They're so deep on the defensive line right now, especially on the edge, that you can get a little bit more creative with how they deploy these guys and some situational considerations on third downs in particular. And I'm very interested to see what comes out there, because I do think it'll be a sub package. You're not going to see a ton of it, but I do think that we should see at least some of that. Overall, the thought is that I love the depth they have on the edge right now.
Yeah.
It's really good depth. Put it up against most teams in the NFL. You'd like the quality of player they have from 1 to 3 on both sides, or 1 to 6 overall. And it's just going to be interesting to see what they do on the interior to compensate for what I perceive to be less depth available to them there.
It's time for Sam Hubbard to kick inside some. I think you hit it. I love the idea of a Hubbard Murphy interior with, at least on paper, because I guess we haven't even seen Murphy suit up, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And Hendrickson along with Ossai. I mean, that's so much fun. And I think it would be effective because one of those guys, you're talking about a guy in Hendrickson who's relentless, an elite athlete in Murphy who, even if he has to work on some pass rushing moves, can win with a couple of things and is going to win when these other guys are losing. One of these guys is going to win, I guess is my point. And Ossai flashed at the end of last year, and Hubbard's coming off of the best season of his career. And I think he can be effective on the inside. So hopefully he's comfortable with that. I think he would be willing, and hopefully they're willing, because that's fun. And then you're right. Let's say Hubbard's nicked up, or he's got a lot of snaps in that game, needs to come out. Well, you do have a Cam sample, right? You do have guys that you could bring in and still fill that role even if it isn't BJ Hill. And so you're right. There's quality depth there. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the guys they have at corner as well. And I think they're pretty solid at corner. Chidobe Awuzie was in the Bengals locker room again on Monday, continuing his rehab. I think everything's on track as you would hope, but they've gotten younger at this position over the past couple of years. But overall, I feel pretty good about it. Obviously, DJ Turner is the big addition in that room, along with DJ Ivy.
Big question is Cheeto's health. If Cheeto's out there ready to go at the start of the season and isn't, still recovering, trusts the knee, is moving well, is the Cheeto that we know, you feel great about corner. I think you feel a little bit better about corner. Adding DJ Turner in the second round, your first corner off the bench, now this second round hyper athlete, excellent mover at the position who can play all three positions, or all three corner positions, technically, outside, inside. At least you would profile him to be able to play inside without missing a beat. You feel really good about the corner depth, not to mention the free agent addition of Sidney Jones. I think quality veteran depth there. If he's your fifth corner, you feel pretty good about that. Jalen Davis got a 2-year deal in the slot. They really like the way he plays.
That's top 6 already. Yeah.
Top 6 feels pretty good. And then you got competition behind them, and Allen George, who's stuck around last year, DJ Ivy, the 7th round pick this year.
And I like George, by the way. I do.
Yeah. I mean, great dude for sure. And when we've seen him get some opportunities, there's a reason he's stuck, right? And then beyond those guys, don't forget waiver claim Chris Lamons from Kansas City last year will be around and competing as well. So again, a deep competition here at corner. If Cheeto's playing, hard to say they're worse. Easy to say their depth is better, and maybe even their starters are better with Cam Taylor-Britt, playing the whole year as a starter, the way that we saw him come on and develop over the course of last season.
Were you trying to take a shot at Eli Apple there by saying Cam Sample was better at corner? Is that what you were trying to do? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Freudian slip,
I do think on paper, assuming Awuzie is back, they are better. Because DJ Turner, will he have some rookie lumps? Sure. But, man, I think he's going to be quite a player and be able to develop into a long-term starter. An outside corner, just to be clear. I think some assume, looking at his size, that he's going to be the nickel. I don't think so. I think Mike Hilton is your nickel. Jalen Davis is the backup there. And in a pinch, Dax Hill or DJ Turner could go in that spot. But, yeah, I like that addition. I think they got good value there. And we talked about the Sidney Jones signing. They had a couple of under-the-radar guys that they brought in, and it just made things feel so much better going into the draft. Obviously, Irv Smith Jr., we talked about tight ends yesterday. Check out that show. But Sidney Jones, Terrell Basham, we just talked about how deep they are in the defensive line room. And I think the cornerback room, assuming your top guy is healthy, is nearly as deep. And there's going to be some good players that are on the outside looking in when it's final cut down day.
I was thinking about this the other day. Just overall thoughts on the defense.
Yeah.
It just seems like it's got to be, and I don't know the depth of other NFL teams to an extensive degree or anything like that, but every position we just talked about outside of the defensive interior, I love the depth the Bengals have.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's top tier depth. Edge rusher, top tier depth. They go 6 deep, maybe 7 deep. And they all have, all those guys are guys that can play at least solid level in the NFL. Linebacker, pretty similar. 4 or 5 guys deep where they've played roles. They've played solid, good NFL games, solid, good NFL reps. Corner, same idea. We just talked about the depth there. Safety, it's a little bit more on paper, it's a projection, and I do think that they're worse on the top end at safety. Again, at least on paper, we'll see how that develops over the course of the year. But I love the depth. Jordan Battle, Tyson Anderson, Michael Thomas, the veteran, Uncle Mike, being the 5th guy in that room.
How are you going to call him Uncle when you're older than him?
Am I? How old is he? I thought that was his name.
I mean,
thought
it
that was his
is.
nickname.
He's also younger than you, just to be clear.
Oh, he is. I'm Uncle Jake. Good to meet y'all. Oh, maybe that's our sign to get out of this show.
I took a shot there because I wasn't sure, honestly, if he was 33,
Yeah.
34. I wasn't sure. I was like, might as well do it. See, this is why you're on the old train. You want the Mark Ingrams, the Mercedes Lewises, and then Dominic Sues. It's funny how things have changed. Now you want guys older than you. A few years ago, I was lobbying for the old heads. It's changed
flip sides.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I just want Zeke
on 1-year deals.
I just want Zeke on a 1-year deal. He's 26, I think. Young pup.
Anyway, the overall point there before we got distracted was that it's hard to look at the depth of this team and think that there are other NFL teams that can compare in terms of having that much quality depth across the board on defense. And honestly, this was a theme on offense for many positions as well, where the depth is present, not everywhere. We would like them to be a little bit better at tight end, for example. And maybe you want another guy at running back to be in the mix there. But on the defensive side of the ball, the only changes at the starting positions are really the safeties. We talked a lot about that.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of that, you've got veterans on the defensive line for the most part, an injection of depth in Myles Murphy, Joseph Osai, continuing to watch for him to expand his role and take another step. And just excellent depth with a lot of additions at corner. Feel pretty good about the defense and the versatility they've added there and the depth they have there for Lou Anarumo to play with.
Yep. I think it rivals, San Francisco you would throw out there. Philly, obviously, you would throw out there. Well, guess what? Those are 2 Super Bowl contenders. And in any team that you would throw out there in comparison, because there's going to be different comments, I would say, on this show that say, oh, well, this team, that team. I bet they're Super Bowl contenders. And so to your point, that's the tier, that's the expectation that the Bengals have put themselves in position to do is contend for a Super Bowl, and they're amongst those teams for sure.
And having that complete team again, because we talk a lot for as much as we talk about the offense on this show, the defense is just a huge part of why they've had the Super Bowl run and the AFC Championship run the last 2 years. And having that ability on both sides of the ball, which again on paper, I mean, this is a good roster, top to bottom. You feel pretty good about this roster. There's a couple question marks. Every team has a couple question marks. You're going to have to see how things play out at a couple of spots, but pretty easy to see them remaining in that same tier of team where they're going to be competing hard for number 1 seed in the AFC again, for Super Bowl contention, all those things that we'd like to talk about with this team. Maybe they didn't do exactly what we wanted, right? With some of the ideas that we talked about this offseason, James, but you come out the other side of it. You go through this roster on the other end of player acquisition part of the offseason, and you see a very competitive roster. No reason that they're not going to be in that same tier of competition as they were last year.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully they take a step forward on offense, which again, check out our offensive episode if you didn't and you just missed it, because we recorded it on a weekend or it hit and you were watching the NBA playoffs or whatever the case is. We broke down the offense position by position as well. Spent a lot of time on tight end, much like we did with safety, because that's kind of a question mark, I would say. But there's not many question marks, Jake Liscow, and that's it's a beautiful thing with Joe Burrow at quarterback, who was there, by the way, working out today, as was T. Higgins and plenty of other Bengals.
Good stuff. We've got rookie camp later this week. We've got Mike Potts joining us tomorrow to talk about the way the NFL draft went. Like to talk to Mike after the draft. We did it last year as well. He provides some really cool, fun insights, some good stories about some of the players the Bengals drafted and generally how that goes down. So we're excited to talk to him.
He's the director of scouting, just to be clear.
Oh, yeah.
He helps put together the Bengals draft board.
If
part of it.
People don't know that. My bad. Good
good
shout. We'll talk to him tomorrow. Until then, Bengals fans, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.